Russia won't collapse, at least not for the reasons many people think it will collapse. And my observations stem mainly from psychology and history. The first point that I'd like to make is that the West essentially lives in this wishful thinking mode that Russia will collapse thanks to economic pressure that's being imposed upon it by the West. That's not going to work. And the reason being is that history and psychology show that this has never been the case in the history of man for a dictatorship such as Russia to fall due to economic reasons. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, suggested that as long as you keep the police force well fed and well disciplined, such state is never in crisis. He was specifically referring to a Stalinist Russia, when Stalin starved 3 million peasants to death, especially in Ukraine, and afterwards he just found cheap labor among the young population in Russia, which at the time demographically was doing very well, and just replace those dead peasants by essentially slave labor. This historical parallel is not limited just to the Soviet Union and Stalinist Russia. You can even go back to ancient Rome. You can even discover it in Nazi Germany. The fall of Nazi Germany was not due to economic reasons. It was a military defeat that caused the fall of Nazi Germany. You can also look into today's examples of DPRK, North Korea. There was no regime fall since the end of the Korean War, and that's because DPRK, North Korea, is essentially in a similar position such as Russia. DPRK, as such, is very isolated and survives only thanks to China's support. But the case for the North Koreans can be made same as that for the Stalinist Russia. As long as the police force and the secret services are well disciplined and well fed, there is no crisis that such a dictatorship would find itself in. You can also take into account the Russian collective unconscious, right? If you take a look into history, there is a lot of suffering, a lot of wars, a lot of famines that the Russians historically had to deal with. And that sort of reflects itself in their ability to basically push their boundaries in suffering. They're able to withstand much more suffering than other nations. Their psyche historically has been exposed to such suffering extensively. Now, economists might say that economy of today is incomparable with the economy that of the ancient times. For instance, ancient Rome or ancient Greece. And that's true. Today's economy is developed. However, human nature and biology remain unchanged. And as long, if I'll put it just simply, as long as you keep the population well fed, they're going to produce artillery shells for you in a factory if you tell them to. They don't even need to be paid. You can see the pattern in the Stalinist Russia when he starved those peasants to death and then just replaced them with essentially slave labor, just providing them with food. So it becomes clear that even though today's economy is substantially different from that of the ancient times, the human factor remains the same. Another point could be made. This is an inspiration that I draw from Stephen Kotkin, who gave an example of how Putinist Russia operates. Within the regime, there are the secret services who essentially impose propaganda, fear, and control over the population, right? Stephen Kotkin gave an example where Elvira Nabiullina, the Russian economist and politician and current governor of the Central Bank of Russia, if somebody were to come up to her and tell her, Putin is ruining our country, uh, she might agree. But the first thing she would think of is this person here because Putin is trying to test me? So essentially, she would think to herself, did Putin send this person to ask me this question to test my loyalty? And then she would just go and call the secret services and inform them about this person who just complained about the current state of Russia. So there's this distrust, an immense amount of distrust in the Russian elite circles. So that's why such a coup or such a collapse is currently almost impossible. The harsh truth is that There's going to be no collapse as long as the police is loyal, as long as it's well disciplined, as long as people have food, as long as the military doesn't fail. Or there is a possibility Russia might collapse. It might collapse through an elite coup. So if the elites decide to assassinate Putin, or Putin is eliminated, then a change might take place. Another option is that Russia would be militarily defeated, right? If Russia didn't have China's support, it's very likely that it might collapse because it would be isolated against the world. And since the United States and NATO as such, and the Asian countries would not be distracted by the threat of China in the Pacific, then Russia would be very isolated and it would be very difficult for them to withstand.